Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling AWS Lambda. This technology is really shaking up how a lot of us build and run applications.
Absolutely.
I mean, imagine just focusing purely on your code,
Yeah.
the logic, without messing with servers.
That's the core idea of serverless, yeah. And Lambda's right at the heart of it. It takes away the infrastructure headache, speeds things up.
And cuts down on that operational overhead, right?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're leaning on a really thorough guide about mastering Lambda.
Okay.
Think of it like a shortcut. It covers everything from like basic setup to more advanced scaling and integrations, the whole AWS ecosystem.
Right. So our mission today is kind of distill that, get the essential knowledge out from this guide.
Yeah, give you a practical grip on using Lambda effectively, whatever your use case might be.
We're hoping for those aha moments, the insights that really get you up to speed fast on what serverless with Lambda can actually do.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's dive in then. Where should we start?
Well, let's start with something pretty fundamental. Environment variables. What are they, really, in the Lambda context? Why bother?
Good question. Think of them like settings you can tweak for your function without touching the code.
Okay.
Like you could tell it, okay, connect to the dev database now, or use this production API key. Super flexible.
Right. And the guide really stresses managing sensitive stuff in there securely.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Things like encryption. Sticking to that principle of least privilege, only giving the permissions actually needed, that's critical.
Makes sense. So staying on that theme of keeping things neat, Lambda layers. What problem are they solving?
Layers are basically shareable packages. Code, dependencies, libraries.
So if I have like 5 functions using the same Python library.
Exactly. Instead of bundling it 5 times, you put it in a layer. Attach the layer to all 5 functions.
Okay, so smaller function packages, easier updates.
Precisely. Update the layer once, and all the functions using it get the update. The guide walks through creating them zip file, upload, attach. It's a big win for manageability.
Gotcha. So environment set, dependencies handled with layers. How do we actually get the function running on AWS?
Okay, deployment. The AWS command line interface, the CLI, is key here.
Right, for automation.
Yeah, the guide points out specific commands to automate deploying your functions. Huge time saver, less room for clicking errors.
Like that update function configuration you might use for environment variables we just talked about.
Exactly. You can change configuration on the fly. The guide even gives a step-by-step for a simple deployment, the basic commands you'd need.
Cool. So the function's live. Now you want it to do something, right? React to things. Like a file upload to S3. How's that work?
That's a classic, yeah. Event-driven architecture 101. You basically tell your S3 bucket, hey, when a new file shows up, trigger this specific Lambda function.
So the upload event kicks off the Lambda.
Right. And the guide explains setting up that trigger, gives examples, maybe resizing an image that gets uploaded or pulling out metadata. You just need to configure which S3 events trigger which function.
Okay, so we're deploying these event-driven things. How do we make sure they're, well, good, efficient, secure? What are the best practices?
Good point. Efficiency is huge in Lambda because it often translates directly to cost. So clean, performant code is step 1.
And security.
The guide hammers this home, least privilege. Only give the function the absolute minimum permissions it needs, nothing more.
And how do you enforce that? Resource-based policies.
That's a core part of it, yeah. These policies attach directly to the Lambda function.
Yeah.
They define who or what can invoke it. So you might say, only this S3 bucket can trigger me, or only API gateway can call this function.
Ah, so you're locking it down.
Exactly. The guide shows how to create them, again, stressing least privilege and using source ARNs.
Source ARNs. That's like being super specific about the source, right? Not just any S3 bucket, but my specific bucket.
Precisely that. Very tight control.
Okay. And beyond the function itself, all the other stuff that gets created, how do we manage that? Clean it up.
Yeah, you don't want orphaned resources costing you money. The guide strongly pushes infrastructure as code IAC.
Like CloudFormation or SAM.
Yep. Define everything in code, makes it manageable, versionable, easy to roll back. Tagging resources is also vital for tracking costs and organization.
And the logs. CloudWatch logs.
Oh yeah, they pile up fast. Automating log cleanup is another key best practice mentioned.
Right. Okay, so Lambda often works with other services. Let's talk integrations. Building REST APIs with API Gateway. How does that fit together?
Super common pattern for serverless backends. API gateway is your front door. It takes the HTTP requests.
And passes them to Lambda.
You configure routes in API gateway to do just that, yeah. Send requests to the right Lambda function to handle the logic.
What configuration details matter there?
The guide mentions things like Lambda memory allocation, timeout settings for both services, and, crucially, authentication, how you control access, IAM roles, maybe Amazon Cognito for user pools.
Okay, what about databases? Reacting to changes in, say, DynamoDB.
DynamoDB streams, that's the key there.
Stream.
Yeah, they capture all the changes to your table items in order. You can trigger a Lambda function whenever there's activity in the stream.
So near real-time reactions to database updates.
Exactly. The guide outlines setting that up. Think use cases like replicating data changes somewhere else almost instantly.
Core. For more decoupled systems, maybe handling tasks asynchronously. SQS. Simple queue service.
Yep. SQS integrates really well with Lambda for that. You set up an SQS queue as a trigger.
So messages arrive in the queue.
And Lambda gets invoked automatically to process them. Great for decoupling, handling load spikes, making things more resilient. The guide covers the setup and benefits.
And similar idea with SNS, simple notification service. How's that used with Lambda?
SNS is more publish, subscribe. You publish a message to an SNS topic.
And any subscribe Lambda functions get triggered.
Right. Good for broadcasting events or fanning out tasks to multiple handlers, including Lambda functions. Scalable, event-driven. The guide has setup details, even some code snippets.
What if you just want a Lambda to run, like, every hour? Scheduled tasks.
That's Amazon EventBridge used to be CloudWatch events.
Ah, right.
You can set up rules using cron expressions or triggered by other AWS events to invoke your Lambda on a schedule.
Use cases.
Oh, backups, periodic data crunching, cleanup jobs. The guide gives an example for an hourly trigger.
And what about traditional databases, like RDS? Can Lambda talk to those?
Definitely. Two main ways the guide mentions. Lambda can connect directly and run SQL queries. Or it can react to RDS events like a backup finishing via SNS or EventBridge notification.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Building microservices. Lambda and DynamoDB seem like a popular pair for that.
Hugely popular, and for good reason. Lambda gives you the serverless compute, DynamoDB gives you the scalable NoSQL database.
And they work well together.
Very well. Automatic scaling for both, plus you can use those DynamoDB streams we mentioned for real-time eventing between services. The guide shows architectural patterns for this.
We talked about Lambda layers before. Can you just quickly recap why they're so helpful when you have lots of functions?
Sure. It's all about centralizing that common stuff, libraries, utilities, custom code.
Right. DRY principle. Don't repeat yourself.
Exactly. Create the layer once, publish it, attach it to all the functions that need it, streamlines development, keeps things consistent, makes updates way simpler. The guide details that whole process.
Okay. And another way to package functions now is using container images. Docker containers.
Yeah, that's a newer option. Gives you more flexibility. You can package larger dependencies, use custom runtimes.
How does it work? You build a Docker image.
Pretty much. You create a Docker file defining the environment, build the image, push it to AWS ECR Elastic Container Registry, and then deploy that image as your Lambda function.
Any downsides?
The main potential one the guide mentions is cold starts. Container images can sometimes take a bit longer to initialize initially compared to zip deployments. Something to be aware of.
Got it. And last integration point for now, real-time data streams with Kinesis.
Right. Kinesis is for massive real-time data ingestion and processing. You can hook Lambda up to a Kinesis stream.
So Lambda processes data records as they flow through Kinesis.
Yep, in your real time. The guide explains how to set up that trigger and important configs like batch size, how many records Lambda processes at once, and parallelization factor for throughput.
Okay, wow. That's a lot of integration power. So functions are built, deployed, integrated. What about keeping an eye on them? Monitoring, performance, cost.
Crucial stuff. For tracing requests and finding bottlenecks, the guide highlights AWS X-Ray. It lets you see how a request flows through Lambda and other connected services. Really helps debug performance issues.
And securing the endpoints, like if you're using API Gateway.
The guide mentions IAM roles again for controlling what the service can do, and Amazon Cognito for managing user authentication and authorization. Two different layers of security.
Makes sense. And the big one, cost. How do you optimize Lambda costs? The guide must cover that.
Oh, yeah. Several key things. Right-sizing memory is huge, finding that sweet spot between performance and cost per invocation.
Because memory affects price and CPU power, right?
Exactly. Also, minimizing execution time, faster functions cost less. Dealing with cold starts, maybe using provision concurrency if latency is critical, although that has its own cost.
Provision concurrency keeps functions warm, but you pay for it.
Correct, it's a trade-off.
What about Lambda extensions? What are those for?
Extensions let you plug in tools from AWS partners or your own custom tools directly into the Lambda environment.
For what purpose?
Mostly observability monitoring, logging, but also security scanning, secrets management. Think Datadog, New Relic, SNCC agents running alongside your function. The guide talks about using them effectively without slowing things down too much.
And for more built-in, detailed monitoring, Lambda Insights.
Right. Lambda Insights is an enhanced monitoring feature within CloudWatch. It gives you much more granular, real-time metrics.
Like what kind of metrics?
Memory usage over time, CPU usage, detailed cold start duration, network stats. Really useful for deep dives into performance troubleshooting and optimization, as the guide explains.
Okay. And for people running Lambda, like really big scale, advanced tuning.
Yeah, the guide touches on that too. Cold starts again, especially if your Lambda needs to access resources inside of VPC that can sometimes add latency.
VPC networking overhead.
Potentially, yeah. So optimizing that, continuing to tune memory and execution time based on real data and specific VPC networking tweaks become more important at scale.
Man, this has been a deep dive indeed. Looking back at everything from the guide, it's just amazing how versatile Lambda is. So many use cases.
It really is. And I think the big takeaway from the guide and our chat is that mastering Lambda isn't just one thing. It's understanding the core ideas, nailing the security.
Knowing how it plugs into everything else in AWS.
Optimizing performance and cost constantly, and then knowing those advanced patterns for when things get really complex.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully everyone listening now has a much stronger foundation. You can use this guide, this discussion, to explore the bits that matter most for your projects.
Definitely. The source material we base this on is incredibly rich.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about that tricky problem you're facing at work, that bottleneck, that place where you wish things were more scalable or efficient.
Yeah.
Could serverless? Could AWS Lambda maybe be the key? Could it unlock a better way to build that solution?
Interesting challenge. Food for thought.
Something to mull over as you continue your own deep dive. Thanks for joining us.